the Lockheed F-80 shooting star, again less than a year from the start of the project. This outstanding plane set many records, such as coast to coast in 4.5 hours, and became our first operational jet fighter.
When Allied intelligence discovered that Germany's jet airplane programs had far surpassed their own in mid-1943, the rush to develop a jet fighter that could surpass them began in earnest. There were various projects being developed simultaneously, but the clear-cut leader was Lockheed's secret program, dubbed skunkworks by its employees. Kelly Johnson wasn't starting from scratch, however. Previously, in 1939, he had submitted an unrequested design proposal to the U.S. Army Air Force for a jet plane called the L-133, but they rejected it, believing it was technologically unfeasible. But Kelly Johnson kept all of his drawings and design work for the L-133. On June 8, 1943, Kelly Johnson was at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, meeting with Army Air Force personnel to sell them on his idea of a jet fighter. He showed them specifications and drawings for what he had designated the Model L-140. And then to close the deal, he told them that he would deliver the first prototype within 180 days. General Frank Carroll told him at the close of his pitch, "You will have a letter of intent this afternoon by 1:30 p.m. There is a plane leaving Dayton for Burbank at 2 o'clock. Your time starts then." It was settled. Kelly would get to build his plane that he had been designing for almost 8 years. He had 180 days, but he only needed 143 to complete the first prototype, which Kelly had nicknamed Lulu Bell. The plane was painted a dark green color, which led the crews to calling it the Green Hornet. Lulu Bell was delivered to Merrick Army Airfield on November the 16th, 1943. However, there were setbacks in the very beginning of the test phase. The first engine, which was supplied by Halford from Britain, was severely damaged when debris was sucked into the engine during its first run-up. The flight testing had to be postponed until the second engine could be delivered from Britain. This second Halford engine was the only other of its type in existence and wouldn't be able to be delivered until January. With the project on hold the rest of the year, there was nothing the team could do but sit on their hands and wait. But finally, on January the 8th, 1944, Lulu Bell took flight for the first time, and during testing, the XP-80 would eventually reach speeds of up to 502 miles per hour. Following the successful testing of the XP-80 prototype, Lockheed received a contract to build 13 more aircraft for extensive testing. The first of the 13 planes flew on September 13, 1944, and all of the initial batch of the test planes had been delivered by December 31st of that year. A handful of these jets would embark on a mission that is almost unknown today, known as Project Extraversion. It was a mission to put the new American jets into action over Europe to test in actual wartime conditions. During this time period, the Messerschmitt Me-262 had made its appearance in the skies over Europe and was wreaking havoc on the Allied bomber formations. The new German fighter was faster, and it could fly higher than any plane the Allies could put into the air. The new Lockheed XP-80, however, was a reasonable matchup for the Me-262, even if the everyday airman or U.S. service member had little to no knowledge about them yet. Allied Air Commander Hap Arnold had been monitoring the Lockheed skunkworks operations closely. He knew around a dozen jets had been constructed by now, and when asked by other air commanders when he wanted to deploy them to Europe, his answer was simple: now. On November 13, 1944, 4 of the prototype X-80 jets were chosen from the dozen or so completed aircraft. Then they were disassembled, boxed up, and sent to Europe via Liberty ships, 2 of them to England and 2 of them to Italy. The 2 planes sent to England arrived at RAF Burtonwood on December 30, 1944, and the 2 planes destined for Italy arrived at Lassina, Italy in January of 1945. After reassembly of the aircraft, they began test flights to work out any bugs in the aircraft or correct any problems that may have been created during transport. Although initially promising, after all, these first test flights of the XP-80 in England would be the first American jet aircraft flights outside of the continental US. But the initial promising outlook of this mission would soon be soured. Tragedy would strike on January 28, 1945. One of the 2 XP-80s sent to England had an engine fire while in flight, which quickly burned through the fuselage, causing the tail of the aircraft to snap off. The jet crashed into a small farm, killing its pilot, Major Frederick Bersotti. The remaining XP-80 in England was loaned to Rolls-Royce to be flight tested with the B-41 turbojet engine. It survived the testing for Rolls-Royce and the war as a whole, but would later crash after an engine failure in 1945. The story in Italy, however, was much brighter for the XP-80. In fact, it wasn't the only jet operating over northern Italy at the time. The Arado AR-234, a jet-powered German light bomber, began flying reconnaissance missions out of Udine, a city in northern Italy, almost at the exact same time that the two XP-80s arrived at the Foggia airfield complex. Whether this was a coincidence or intentionally done by the Allied air commanders has never been determined. The two Italian planes would begin to fly reconnaissance missions in February and March of 1945, operating principally at a Foggia airfield. Only a select few crews were allowed to work on the new jet planes. Most regular Army Air Force crews were not allowed around the jets. These new jets were still being kept mostly a secret. This mission, as a whole, was part of a testing phase for these new jets after all. The XP-80 that had crashed in England seriously set back the scale of the whole mission. Hap Arnold knew he couldn't have brand new jets flying around and crashing all over Europe. These planes were meant to bolster the morale of American bomber crews, who had lost thousands of men up to this point. If word got out that the new American jets were not even able to fly test flights without falling apart and slamming into the ground, it would make the ME-262 look even more unstoppable. General Karl Spaatz, who was part of the Strategic Air Force Group in Europe, wrote a letter to Hap Arnold expressing his concern over their lack of ability to have reliable photo reconnaissance at the time, in about June of 1944. They had sent 10 photo recon planes to photograph Munich in 1 week. 6 of them were attacked and could not complete their missions. 3 of them were shot down, and all of this happened by ME-262 jets. So now that we know about this letter sent to General Spaatz to General Arnold, it is interesting to see that the two Italian jets were limited for reconnaissance missions. Spaatz knew about the XP-80s and believed that their speed and altitude capabilities would allow them to fly over German-held territory without worrying about anti-aircraft fire or Luftwaffe planes being able to get into the air quick enough to intercept them. The AR-234s were causing as much anxiety as the ME-262s were. The German jet-powered light bomber had been used almost exclusively as a reconnaissance airplane. One such famous mission by the AR-234 took place on August 2, 1944. Allied troops were busy unloading cargo on the beaches of Normandy when suddenly they heard a strange sound coming from the sky. They looked up and caught a glimpse of the future when an AR-234 screeched over them, traveling almost 500 miles per hour. Between the ME-262 and the AR-234s, the Allied forces had to at least demonstrate that they could also deploy jet planes, no matter how limited their role may be in reality. The use of the AR-234s over Italy, spying on Allied air bases, would have been a perfect opportunity to place the XP-80s into a position where they would be photographed and cause much anxiety among the German command. On the same note, the XP-80s in Italy would not have to worry about stumbling into a dogfight against the ME-262, which were not flying over Italy and possibly being shot down by them. It was a psyop as much as it was an actual jet testing mission. After the war, using captured ME-262s, test pilots at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, testing the German jet plane against the P-80, came to the conclusion that the ME-262 was a superior jet plane to the P-80. This was their official statement, quote, "Despite the difference in gross weight of nearly 2,000 pounds, the ME-262 was superior to the average P-80A in acceleration and speed, and approximately the same in climb performance. The ME-262 apparently has a higher critical Mach number from a drag standpoint than any other current Army Air Force fighters," end quote. One interesting thing that did happen soon after the war was over, Howard Hughes was actually able to pull some strings and get his hand on an ME-262, which he modified and intended to use in jet races. But once it was found that the ME-262 would win these races without breaking a sweat, he was discreetly told that he was not allowed to use the jet in the competition. During the new age of propaganda that emerged from World War II, both the Soviets and the Americans could not risk such a PR blunder as showing at a public event that a foreign jet was superior to their own aircraft. Project Extraversion, even though it started off on good footing, quickly descended into obscurity, partly because its scope was so limited after the crash that killed Major Frederick Brossotti in England, and also because it wasn't evident how much longer the war would even last. The captured ME-262s would go on to lend a helping hand to U.S. jet manufacturers in developing their own aircraft. The Lockheed P-80 would still have a long road to walk, however. The week of the atomic bombing on Japan to end the war, Major Richard Bong, a Medal of Honor recipient and America's top flying ace from World War II, shooting down 40 Japanese aircraft, was flying a P-80 during testing when a fuel pump failure caused the plane to crash. Bong ejected from the plane, but he was too low to clear the aircraft and was drugged by his chute into the ensuing fireball. The plane crashed in North Hollywood into an empty field. The entire P-80 fleet was grounded. Much investigation and oversight occurred until the plane was deemed flight-worthy again. The F-80 would go on to serve honorably in Korea after its once initial bugs were finally worked out. The early history of jet aircraft among all the participants of the countries that were developing the technology, such as Britain, Germany, and the United States, was riddled with fascinating stories and sagas such as Project Extraversion. It's easy to get lost in the grand scheme of the Cold War or the development of jet aircraft, but I think this simple mission in the final months of World War II is also very important. Even though none of the 4 aircraft accomplished anything of note, having come from so far behind in jet development compared to Britain or Germany, then having the Bell P-59 be a huge disappointment, the US being able to actually have some type of jet aircraft in the air over Europe before the end of the war is almost a miracle. This small feat would catapult the development of later jet-powered aircraft to the front of the line of almost every Pentagon budgeting clerk or war planner. It was a proof of concept and the first time American jets would fly over foreign soil. Alright guys, well I hope you liked my video. Thank you for liking, commenting, and subscribing on all my stuff. If you have any more information about this mission, put it down in the comments. I really appreciate all my new Patreon subscribers. We recently went over 20,000 subscribers on the channel, which is amazing. I never would have ever guessed that that would happen to my channel. Alright, well thanks for watching guys. I really appreciate it. Have a good day.